Thank you for joining us on the Photo Flunky Show, episode 119. For today's topic, we're asking the question, does every photographer really need Photoshop? Hi, my name is William Beem.
Hi, my name is Lee Beem.
And I use Photoshop.
I don't.
So you can tell this is going to be another one of those episodes where we just don't see eye to eye on some things.
Do we have any other kind of episodes? I mean, when it comes to photography, it's not that we disagree. We just tackle it.
Yeah, we just do things differently, don't we?
Yeah.
I know there are some people that really don't use Photoshop. I think some people are kind of concerned about the complexity and the time that it takes to get into Photoshop. For the longest time, the cost was certainly a big thing.
Yeah.
Before Creative Cloud, you had to come up with several $100s just to get into Photoshop. And then if you didn't know how to use it, you had to spend more money learning how to use it.
It was just silly. I mean, you know, for the regular hobby photographer, you had to really sit and question, how seriously am I investing in this? Just because of the cost.
And it's a valid point. But before we really get into talking about that, I want to let you know that show notes are going to be available at williambeem.com/episode 119. And there'll be links to subscribe there, or you can visit our player at photoflunky.com. Also, Luminar Jupiter is out. That's the version of Luminar from Skylum, formerly MacFun, that makes the Windows version on par feature for feature with the Mac version. And I think like 3 things that the Mac version does that the Windows version doesn't, but those are limited to what would happen on a Mac operating system. For example, the Photos app on Mac, you can integrate with the Mac version of Luminar. You wouldn't need to do that on Windows. So otherwise, Luminar is finally compliant, with all the features for Windows users. So if you're looking to check out Luminar, please give it a try. There is a free trial available for you. And I would appreciate it if you'd use my link to get there. Just go to williambeem.com/Skylum. And if you decide to buy based upon my recommendation, I can save you $10 using the coupon code BEAM, just like my last name, BEEM. So that's an affiliate link. I'll get a little commission if you do decide to buy, but it'll also save you $10. And before you buy, if you're not sure about it, go ahead, try the free trial. I've been using Photoshop for a number of years now, and I like it. I find it a very useful tool, but I didn't start off diving into Photoshop right away. As a matter of fact, I probably spent a couple of years just using, at the time it was Apple's Aperture program, to try and finish my photos before I would ever do anything leaping into Photoshop. And Lee, you use Lightroom, but you really don't, even though you've got it available as part of the photography plan on the Creative Cloud, you don't really use Photoshop.
Oh, I've used it 3 times, maybe 4 times. Do you know what I did? You had to show me how to do it.
All right. What were those times? Or what did you do?
I needed an exact color that was in my photo, and I wanted to use it for the font.
All right. So I showed you how to use the eyedropper.
You showed me, yeah. That's all.
And that was it?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, though, I think if you're going to do something for a graphic, instead of using Photoshop, you'll go to Canva.
Well, that's where I was making it. And I have good reasons for that.
What are they?
And before Canva, I had something else that I used.
You had a scrapbooking tool.
The good reason is I've sat and watched you doing graphics on Photoshop. And while I appreciate that you have more control over every little thing that you're doing, it's almost painful to watch. It takes so long. And I think I could just do this in 2 minutes. The same thing. And look, there are some things that you can do on there. A lot of things, I'm sure, that cannot be done in a program like Canva. And I'm talking specifically graphics, because that was the reference I was making. Really, just everything is so long-winded. You have to go through so many steps. And not only that, it's so complex. There's so much stuff in there that unless you know exactly where to find everything and how it works and how to put it together, you're going to waste a whole lot more time. So you've got to, then it's the learning. I think the learning time that you invest is more. And that's clearly worth it for some genres of photography and some types of post-processing, depending what you're doing. But for me, it's not.
And I think the genre of photography that you are into really helps dictate whether you need to use Photoshop or not. So for example, I enjoy portrait photography. If I want to get in to really do some portrait retouching, there are plugins that I have and they can help me out. But there's certain things that I just need to get in there with Photoshop to really give it a fine touch, before I trust it. In your case, though, I don't know that you need to do the same thing.
So far, I haven't. And there have been times where it would be nice to have control to do something. But then even if I'm not in a rush for it, the amount of time I would need to invest in learning and watching tutorials. And that's the other thing that I find difficult, because Photoshop is like the industry standard. There is so much information out there on how to use it. And it goes back so far, searching for something is just overwhelming.
There is a ton of information about how to do things in Photoshop. There's more than one way to do the same thing in Photoshop. And I think that confuses a lot of people in that, all right, what's the best way? And it's that, well, it's not really a best way. Some ways are probably a bit of a hack. Some ways are maybe more time consuming than others, but there's a number of ways to do a particular job. For example, if you want to remove something, you've got a healing brush, you've got a spot healing brush, you've got a clone tool or clone stamp tool, you've got a patching tool. And it's like, how do you know which one you want to use at a given time? Whereas if you see a problem in Lightroom that you want to remove something, what do you do?
Yeah, you see, I don't want a 7-year degree to be able to process a photo in a minute.
No, I understand that. I guess it really depends upon what you want to do. The nice thing about using Lightroom, even for portrait retouching, is you can put a lot of power in one brush stroke, whereas in Photoshop, one stroke does one thing. And then if you want to do something else to the same spot, you have to get another adjustment tool and do the same stroke again. Maybe one for sharpening, one for a color that you want to add. And these things just kind of balance up on each other, and you end up doing the things over and over again. And you're working on different layers, which is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you can do something on one layer and it doesn't affect everything else. If you don't like it, you can get rid of that layer and you haven't lost all of your work. Mm. But it is, as you say, time consuming.
I mean, you can do that in Lightroom as well. You click on whatever adjustment gradient tool you use, whether it's the brush or the gradient tool, and it shows the little dots where it is. You click to activate it and you can just remove it or change it up there. So instead of working with the layers, you just kind of hitting the...
Yeah, because they're isolated and the source, independent. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And now there are some global adjustments that you'll do in Lightroom, like on the basic panel, that's going to affect everything. Mm-hmm. So if you want to separate those out, you're going to have to, like you said, do it with an adjustment brush or a gradient or, some kind of masking tool. Doing it in Photoshop gives you more fine control, particularly if you're using a tablet. I've got a little Wacom Intuos 5. If I really want to get in and work on eyes, I feel more comfortable doing that in Photoshop because it does seem to allow me more fine control than pretty much any other tool I've tried. But not every genre of photography, I think, requires that level of attention to detail.
There's great stuff that it does. It's just not stuff that I need.
Like I said, I use Photoshop and I'm glad that I have it. One of the reasons that I like having Photoshop, it is a host for a number of the plugins that I use. And I'd say a lot of those will probably work with Lightroom, but not necessarily all of them.
Yeah, plugins in Lightroom. Yeah.
It can get to the point where you're simply using Lightroom to launch another program. So, for example, at the beginning of the show, I mentioned Luminar, and I really do like Luminar. I like it for a lot of things. I don't like it for portrait photography. And I think Lightroom has an advantage over Luminar in this case because you can save your adjustment brushes. So, in other words, if you make something to enhance someone's eyes of a particular color, you can save that brush. In Luminar, you can't save that brush. So you've got to build it every time you do it. There are little inconveniences. You can save the brush in Photoshop. You can save it in Lightroom. You can't save it necessarily in that plugin. For portrait photography, there's really nothing dedicated for enhancing skin in Luminar. But for travel or product or almost any other genre of photography where you're doing primarily global adjustments and then a few broader local adjustments, I think it's a wonderful tool.
Luminar is really quick as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things I liked about it. And the new version actually does speed up things from where it was before. The folks at Skylum are doing a great job as far as adding useful items to Luminar.
And it looks pretty idiot-proof too.
But as far as Photoshop, outside of doing portrait photography, I don't necessarily think that I need it for most everything else I do. I mean, let's take something like the liquefy tool. So if I want to kind of slim down a model's features or enhance a model's features, liquefy will kind of help you stretch the boundaries. In other words, the outline. So if you want to make a woman's hip look larger or a man's muscles look larger, you can kind of tap it with the liquefy tool and it'll do something like that.
So you stretch the truth.
You can. Oh, very much so. I don't know of another tool that does anything like that.
I couldn't imagine using that, or at least not on people. Can you use it on other stuff?
You can use it on anything, but pretty much every Photoshop or every magazine cover you've seen has been through Photoshop, and somebody has slimmed down a model's size or trimmed down someone's face. Another one is just the hair. When you look at these magazine covers and you see this flowing hair all over the place, well, they probably puff that up with a liquefy brush.
Yeah.
Another thing they do with liquefy is take a good look at the eyes on the subjects on these magazines. They make the eyes bigger than they really are.
Yes.
It's because you see big eyes and you're just kind of drawn into it, almost like looking at a puppy.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know of any other tools outside of Photoshop, or maybe something like Affinity Pro, which is a competitor to Photoshop, that really does something like that. You don't find that so much in other tools. I think there's a plugin called Portrait Pro that will enhance the eyes and do some of these features. But for the most part, they're very specific to a person's body. That's not necessarily like you want to make wheels look bigger on a car.
Well, that depends.
All right. So for most of your photography, you're really just using the develop module of Lightroom.
Yeah.
Are you getting kind of the same things over and over again?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm doing different types of photography. I use it for various things. I would say I've got some little, not presets, but some little shortcuts that I've saved in like my adjustment brushes. I also like to just copy a global. What I do is if I'm doing a whole bunch of things that were set in the same place, I just apply the global adjustments to everything. But no, I really do just go through each one for what it is. I don't really use presets or anything right now, at least.
The thing with Lightroom presets that I always keep in the back of my mind is that they have to generate previews in order to view them. And that's part of what slows down Lightroom overall. In other words, if you're having a problem with Lightroom slowing down, and maybe because your disk space is being chewed up or the computer is busy generating some of those previews. I've seen people that will take a photo and then they'll just go take a look at it, from preview after preview after preview.
And eventually stops.
Well, the computer has to spend all that time generating those previews for each preset that you look at. And now Lightroom will allow you to see a full-size preview. So you can have a full-size image in Lightroom and then just go down the side of all your presets and look at how it affects it. It's a very useful tool to see which preset affects your image. You'll see your hard disk is just really chugging and it's slowing everything down. So it's taking up.
Maybe it's, for some things I just have to be patient. Might be useful.
Could be.
Yeah, but I just do, I've got very simple adjustments and it's not that I save stuff or have presets as much as I kind of have a feel for there are certain things that I adjust in a certain way. Your lighting and your colors and whatever it is on a different day, the same sort of setting is not going to be the same. So I just deal with each image for what it is on the day. That's
kind of the way I do it too. That's one of the few things I think that we do alike.
We do something the same.
We do something the same because I've looked at presets before and I just never find a preset that really works with what I want to do. Now, I understand what you've told me in the past. You used other people's presets to learn how to use Lightroom.
Yes.
Because you could see what they were doing.
Yeah.
But
and that worked. Because now I understand that might be one of the reasons why it's kind of quick for me, because I've got a feel for what I like. I know the kind of looks that I like and don't like. There's certain sliders that I know beyond a certain point most of the time are not to my taste, or, you get a feel for the way you do things to generate the results you like in certain situations. And I think you get quicker at working them when you automatically know where to go.
With regard to Photoshop, let me ask you this. Are you afraid of getting into Photoshop, or are you just simply not interested?
Neither really. It's a time-consuming thing. And I guess my need for Photoshop has never got to the point that it's been a motivator for me to sit down and say, okay, where do I start to learn something? There have been times where I thought, oh, it would be nice to do this. And I take a look at some tutorials, and I have. I'm into my digital scrapbooking, and I started looking at things and I thought, this is just so complicated. It was that was kind of a turn off. I looked at it and I thought, I don't love this that much.
And now you make a lot of graphics both for social media and for products, and you do that in Canva.
I do it mostly in Canva. Yeah, I've got a little free tool which is something that I've used for since ever, and it's called Photoscape. It is not, the user interface is not that great, but it does stuff sometimes that Canva doesn't. And look, Canva is not without its issues. Canva has a habit of going offline probably on average once a week, and it typically seems to be when I need to get something up, and you can just do nothing. So yeah, it's not. I'm not saying that it's the perfect alternative, but it is most of the time working, and it's quicker for me.
But so that's really the important thing is with Canva, you can get in and get out in a shorter amount of time than working with Photoshop. And I've watched you do this work before, and I think one of the reasons that you can do that is because there are assets within Canva that you can get. So in other words, if you need graphics, if you need a border or something to put on your image, that's available right there. Whereas that Photoshop doesn't really come with that. If you want it, you've either got to build it or buy a separate package.
It doesn't. And the other thing is that because of time, my schedule is just so full. For example, I do a lot of work on Instagram. So really anything else that goes out on social media gets shared from Instagram. And that's just something I did to maximize my use of time. So for me to load something to Instagram, it has to be done from my phone. And the one nice thing about Canva, although the app on the phone is terrible for actually trying to do something, it is a great way to save your stuff. So what I would do is I can take my photo and work on it on the laptop, save it in Canva, open the app on Canva on my phone, click on the thing and save it to my phone. And it's good to go straight through to Instagram. And from there, it shares out elsewhere. Instead of having to email myself something and then save it on the phone, it cuts out a few steps and it's all there.
See, in my case, if I'm doing portraits, Photoshop, I think, is almost indispensable, even if I use a plugin. So, for example, for skin, I've got ImageNomic Portraiture is a plugin that I use, and a lot of other portrait photographers do as well. And I think that does a very nice job, but that you can always go back and kind of tweak it in Photoshop. So if you think it applied too much or you didn't get it quite right while you're in the plugin, you can reduce the opacity. You can work with those layers to get it where you want. And if it applied someplace you don't want to, you can put on a mask and you can just brush it in or brush it out where you want to. I think that kind of control is very important to me. Something else I do is, let's say with hair, I'm not necessarily one who likes to liquefy things and really blow up the hair, but I do want to put in highlights in the hair that maybe I don't see coming out in the photo. So I can brush in selectively just little highlights in the hair, just, places where hair should look shinier than other parts of the hair. I'll do that for, brightening the irises and the whites of the eyes, but I can do that in Lightroom as well. That one's kind of a 50-50 for me. As a matter of fact, I'd actually give more credence to Lightroom than Photoshop for what I do on the eyes. But when I think about it with other genres of photography, I don't know that I really need Photoshop because I'm not doing much manipulation as I would perhaps with a portrait, which makes the portrait sound bad, doesn't it?
Well, I think the thing with Photoshop now is saying that, you're not really using it. It's not really a knock on the product. Photoshop comes as part of a package now. When it was something that you were investing some serious cash into owning and something that wouldn't last forever because you're always subject to updates, that was a different story. Now Photoshop happens to be included as one of the, fundamental programs in the most basic version of the Creative Cloud membership, but it's there if you want to use it. I don't kind of feel like I'm throwing money at something that I'm not using because I make up for it with how much I use Lightroom. It's worth my, $10 a month?
$10 a month for Lightroom and Photoshop, which, you used to spend like $650 just to get Photoshop. Yeah. And that was good until the next major release came out. Well, look how many years you'd have to spend $10 a month to cost that much before you spend an upgrade fee of a couple $100 to get the next version. I think Photoshop and Lightroom combined in this program, if you're going to continue to use it, is much less expensive and easier to get into this way than it has been in the past. But the question is, does every photographer need it? And I think, quite honestly, my answer is no, not every photographer needs Photoshop, even if it is by default part of that little bundle.
Yeah, but you might have fun learning it.
Well, I think it definitely opens up some doors for your creativity. A lot of that can also happen with plugins, whether it be On One Raw or MacFun Luminar or some of the Topaz Labs plugins or other ones that are out there. It's a framework where you can add on other things. And some of that applies with Lightroom as well. The question is, how do you apply it and how can you manipulate it in either Photoshop or Lightroom? But for the most part, I would say, in my mind, portrait photographers, I think, you ought to have Photoshop. You ought to have a good understanding of how to use it. And perhaps if you're doing something commercial and you need to have a certain level of detail, or you need to manipulate things on a very detailed level, Photoshop is going to be important. But if you're simply enhancing an existing image, you don't need to move anything around, you don't need to do anything beyond a crop tool, I would say no, you probably don't need Photoshop. You know what else I think Photoshop is good for? Photoshop is definitely something that you're going to want to have when you're compositing. And I know that you can do some simple things. For example, in Luminar, you can replace the sky, or you can add what's called an adjustment image. And then you can use some of the masking tools to maybe replace the sky, or bring something in that wouldn't otherwise be there. But it's not quite the same thing as compositing. In Photoshop, you may want to bring in multiple elements and be very precise and specific about how you arrange them, how you size them, and how they're presented in I guess, either a composite photo, or in some cases, maybe something like scrapbooking, if you're into that sort of thing. So Photoshop definitely has its place, and I think it's that layer of control that really makes it useful for a lot of folks. But what we were talking about is, if you're just processing a photograph by itself, enhancing it, then I think the genres we talked about are probably where I can say Photoshop is helpful. I like it, but it isn't necessarily required.
Well, I haven't needed it yet, and maybe one day I will, and I'll have a need for it, and then I'll learn what I need to know. But for right now, my needs don't rely on Photoshop. So
actually, I think your needs have simply found an alternative with Canva, because what you're doing there is kind of what Photoshop was really designed for, is to bring these different elements together and manipulate them so that you can make one graphic out of it.
All right.
That was kind of the original job, as I understand it, of Photoshop. Not necessarily for photographers, but for designers. Canva, you're using the free version of it.
Yeah.
And it's faster, it's easier to get into, and it gives you the results that you want.
It really does.
And I know I've mentioned this before, but you've got businesses that you deal with that look at your results and say, wow, that's better than some of the stuff we've paid other people to do.
Well, I'm working on Canva, the business version of Canva for work, which is not my own stuff. I have a look at what business Canva has and what I'm getting with the free version. It's not a whole lot of stuff that's different.
No, it's really not.
And the other thing is that when the site goes down, it goes down for everybody, whether you're paying or not. I think that the one advantage of having Photoshop in a situation like that, if you're very comfortable using it, is that because you're not working online on your work, you don't rely on somebody else's service being up to be able to do what you need to do.
Yeah. But I think Canva is useful when it's up. And there, like I said, there are a lot of graphical resources and also photographs that you can bring in. Some of them are free. Some of them are paid, like for $1 for each resource. That means that also when you have to make variations, like, so if, for example, if you have one as an Instagram size post, another one's a Facebook header post, for each one of those paid resources, you have to pay for each format that you pull down. That's a lot cheaper than going off and buying Photoshop. Canva for work, I think is what they call it, has this little magic resize button. So they'll take whatever you've made, let's say it's for a Pinterest diagram or a Pinterest, image, whatever you want to call it. If you want to make the same thing into a YouTube thumbnail or any other format, it will automatically put your assets that are on that Pinterest image onto another tab. It'll open up and put it out there for the size that you've selected. But if there are any of those are paid elements, they'll charge you again to download that one.
Yeah, and also that magic resize, you still have to shift the stuff around. All it does is it saves the things you've put in there. There's actually an easier way to do it.
It doesn't make it look pretty.
Oh, there's an easier way to do it where you don't need the resize, and I do that on my free one the whole time.
All right, what is that?
All right, so for example, if I know that I need different crops for the same graphic that I'm making, I know I have to shift stuff around anyway. So what I'll do is I'll start with the biggest one. So say, for example, that's a 16 by 9 for whatever reason, for a blog post header, and then I need to make an Instagram thing on it. I'll make the whole thing the 16 by 9 in the full resolution, and then I'll save that, and then you can create a copy. Mm-hmm. So when you hover over its file or something, and then you can make a copy of it. You don't lose your original image. You make a copy of that. I take a square, like one of the shapes, and I position it, the top left corner down to the bottom so that I've got the square. I duplicate that and shift it so that the two touch, and then I delete the one on the side I'm going to be working on. So I know where my line is for the square crop, and I just adjust everything. I kind of slide it over. You might want to make the other one transparent so you can see where your things are underneath the opaque piece, and just drag them around until it's done. And then all I do is I download that onto my computer and upload it as an image into Canva. and put it into a square crop, and then it's been sized for you already.
Okay, so it's a little bit of work, but it saves you.
Yeah, or you can skip that last set. If you're putting it straight onto your phone, you can actually just take it straight out of the Canva app on your phone, which is great for just downloading things without having to send them.
Well, actually, you know what?
Once you pull it up into Canva, you just slide it across.
That's another advantage, I guess, for Canva over Photoshop. If you're doing that kind of graphic design, is you can do it on your phone or iPad or some kind of mobile device without having to really be at a desktop and launch into a full application.
Yeah, and sometimes I don't put a graphic on something. You know, for example, if it's just a quick photo and I don't have time. Some of them don't need graphics. The picture speaks on its own. In that case, I just do it on Lightroom Mobile and take it straight from there into Instagram.
Okay. That was all we had for today, but we were kind of asking the question, does every photographer need Photoshop? In my opinion, it is a very useful tool. I'm happy to be an affiliate for it. I use it a lot for my portrait photography, but the more I've used it, I've realized that I don't necessarily need it for every photo that I do. And I think I'm coming up with the idea that unless you have a specific commercial need or portrait photography, you can probably do just as well using Lightroom and perhaps maybe some of the plugins that are available.
Mm-hmm.
We would love to know what you think. So leave us a comment at the show notes on williambeem.com/episode 119. Thank you so much for listening to us on the Photo Flunky Show. Hey, if you're using Lightroom and you're wondering why is this slowing down, I might have the answer for you. I've got a free ebook called Lightroom Classic Performance Hacks, and you can find it at williambeem.com/LR-hacks, Hacks. And it will walk you through a number of things settings you can change in Lightroom, maybe resources you can add to your computer, but it will also explain what causes Lightroom to slow down and how you can change your behavior to help things speed up a little bit. So that's available for you for free. williambeem.com/LR-hacks. Thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we'll see you again next week.